The New York Rangers, continuing their circus atmosphere, have convinced another team to take one of their players, a Kaapo Kakko trade. The Leafs loading up their first line with all of their all-world talent, and a trade that almost was, but never was, on today's edition of Locked On NHL.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Thursday edition of Locked On NHL. I'm Nick Zararis, the host of Locked On Oilers. That's my good friend, and the co-host of Locked On Penguins, Hunter Hodies. We want to thank everyone who's making Locked On NHL their first listen of the day. Locked On NHL, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's show is brought to you by FanDuel, where you can enjoy the NFL season with a big return. New customers can place a $5 bet and get started with $150 in bonus bets. If you win your first $5 bet, visit FanDuel.com to get started. So, on today's show, the New York Rangers have continued their circus-like season with another trade. Trade doesn't make a whole lot of sense if you're the Rangers. We'll hear from the experts of both the Rangers and the Kraken. Our second segment, we're going to tackle the Leafs loading up all of their star power on a line, what that does for your lineup. We'll talk about it philosophically and then in practice what that does. And then the final segment, we're going to take a mosey on down to Locked On Oilers land, where we're going to talk about a trade that almost happened 5 years ago and would have presented a very different, divergent path in the NHL. So starting off, there is arguably no bigger story in all of professional hockey right now than the circus that is the New York Rangers. They've traded away 2 players in the last month. They have lost 11 of their last 14 games. They have lost to the worst team in the NHL 2 separate times, and it was a different team each time, and are currently mired in one of the worst stretches of hockey of this century for the organization. So we are going to start with the Kakko trade from the Rangers' perspective. So here is John of Locked On Rangers.
Hey, what is going on, hockey fans? John Chick with Locked On New York Rangers, reacting to the news that Kaapo Kakko has been traded to the Seattle Kraken in exchange for Will Borgen, a third-round pick next year, and a sixth-round pick next year. And my first reaction to this is that I just don't really understand it. It feels like this is a case of Kaapo Kakko being scapegoated, but I had the exact same reaction a couple of games ago when the Rangers chose to make Kaapo Kakko a healthy scratch. When it comes to Kakko, if you look at him in terms of him being a former number 2 overall pick, then I think it probably is fair to say that he has not lived up to the expectations, especially when it comes to, offensive production and points per game and all that stuff. But when you take that away, you just look at Kaapo Kakko, the hockey player. He is an effective player. He is somebody that I think has had a positive impact on the Rangers for the last couple of seasons here. So again, to me, this just feels like a case of scapegoating. I think Seattle got a good one. If I'm a Kraken fan, I definitely feel pretty good about this. As far as the Rangers, I don't really understand what they're doing, but you can say that for about the last month or so with what's gone on there. So that's pretty much it.
So we'll start with the Rangers perspective. Then we'll hear from Erica. We'll talk about the Kraken perspective. From the Rangers perspective, I don't want to say this is purely because he was the one person to actually say, what are we doing the other day about being healthy scratched, about saying, I definitely am not the problem here. But you know that old joke about my Kaapo Kakko wasn't traded because he made a problem shirt is raising a lot of questions. That's what this is to me. I think the Rangers never really, especially Chris Drury as general manager, never really liked or valued what Kakko brought to the table. His name has been out there in trade rumors for the better part of the last 2 years. He's a pending restricted free agent after this season. So if you're the Rangers, this is cutting your losses, eating your L. You drafted him 2nd overall 5 seasons ago. You're getting 2 lottery tickets and a 3rd and a 6th and a warm body and Will Borgen, who is going to play because they don't want to play Victor Mancini, who they're relatively high on. But Hunter, if you're looking at this from the outside looking in, this doesn't solve your problem if you're the Rangers.
No, it doesn't. I mean, you got 2 lottery picks back. Okay, whatever. But then you got Will Borgen, who I watched a little bit of his tape this morning. I've looked into the data. It feels like, Nick, they just tried to trade for a younger version of Jacob Trouba. If that's what it feels like, doesn't bring a lot of offense.
Don't forget he's American.
Yeah, that too. The underlyings are not really impressive. So it's just weird because I read that we've had interest in him for quite some time. And it's like, feels like the Rangers kind of have a type of defenseman that they go after, whether it's, drafting trading, signing, etc. So, I mean, this is not really going to solve their defensive issues. They have way bigger issues defensively than just, sending out Trouba, Keandre Miller's hurt. Even Fox hasn't even been as good this year, which is crazy because he's one of the best defensemen in the league. Kaapo Kakko, I feel like if he were, and I hate saying this, but I feel like it's true. If he were Canadian, I feel like he would have gotten a bit of a longer leash with the Rangers. I feel like that would have been the case on virtually any team in the league, but especially a team like the Rangers. I understand why he was frustrated. I mean, I would be too, especially since he was healthy scratch for players who I feel like aren't better than him. But he'll be going to a different situation in Seattle. He'll have a chance to kind of reset a bit. But with the Rangers, this is not going to fix really any of their problems. They still are a mess defensively. They're not getting the offense. There's going to be more changes to come. I mean, obviously Chris Kreider is still out there on the trade market, but that's easier said than done trading him, Nick, just because of his salary. Not a lot of teams are looking to take that on right now. You have the roster freeze tonight, so that's probably not going to happen before that. That's probably a move if it happens. Maybe it's around the trade deadline, a little bit after. But the biggest thing for the Rangers that's kind of working against them right now, Nick, look at their schedule coming up. They have a lot of playoff teams. They got Boston coming up.
They have Dallas twice. They have the Devils twice. They have Vegas in there. They have Colorado in there. They have the Bruins in there. It's a real murderer's row. 13 of their next 14 are against teams that made the playoffs last year or in a playoff spot right now. And the one team that isn't, Chicago, they already lost to this season. So we're going to hear from Erica about the Kraken perspective. Then we'll tackle it from Ron Francis's side of things.
Seattle Kraken finally make a move to boon the offense, particularly on the right wing. Erica L. Ayala here wanting to cover the trade. The Seattle Kraken pick up Kaapo Kakko, a 23-year-old right winger from the New York Rangers, in exchange for defenseman Will Borgen, as well as a 3rd and 6th round pick in the 2025 NHL draft. This is what Ron Francis told NHL.com. We've been kicking the tires on different things with Jordan Eberle out. We're short on the right side. This guy gives us somebody that can play the right wing. He's a big boy. He's got some skills. So we thought it was the right move to make. Right now, on that 4th line, you have Ryan Winterton playing on the right wing alongside Mitchell Stevens and Ty Cartier. You also have Oliver Bjorkstrand, Brandon Tanev, and Andrei Burakovsky. We've already seen Bjorkstrand and Berkey be healthy scratches this year. And there's been conversation since last season that Brandon Tanev might be on the move. Seattle media will get a chance to speak to Ron Francis on Thursday about the move, so make sure you stay locked on Kraken for more details and how this will impact the Seattle Kraken roster.
So looking at it from Seattle, it's a good dart throw. Worst case, he's not on the team. He's restricted free agent after this year. You have 2 more years of team control, and then he's an unrestricted free agent. Even if he doesn't pop off, even if he doesn't perform particularly well, he's cheap. He's not a bad player. He kind of fits the forecheck cycle vibe that Seattle likes to play. And at best, you luck yourself into a middle 6 forward who maybe can kill penalties for you if you build the trust with them. It's a good dart throw. Borgen's a restricted free agent after this year himself, and a 3rd and a 6th. Those are lotto tickets. This is reasonable stuff from Seattle. I'm still not particularly sure about how competitive they can be in the short term, but this is a good dart throw. I would do this if I were Seattle.
Agreed. It kind of reminds me of what Kyle Dubas has been doing a little bit with the Penguins by acquiring, Cody Glass, Philip Tomasino, Nick, some players who are a bit young, weren't working out with their respective teams, but kind of, again, having a little bit of dart throw, seeing what they can do in the lineup. And okay, if it doesn't work out, whatever, you move on after the year. You didn't really pay much to get him. It was with both moves, Nick, with Tomasino and Glass. The Penguins really didn't give up much for either player. They were dart throws. They want to see if they can inject some youth, some energy in the lineup. Tomasino has been really good for the Penguins. Cody Glass has a goal pretty recently. So the Kraken, they're kind of hoping for something similar. They want some more youth in the lineup, more energy. They want to see if Kakko can get something going after a bit of a struggle this year with the Rangers. He's had a couple really good years with them before. So, maybe in a new system, he could potentially be even better. So I totally do not mind this move at all for Seattle.
We are going to take our first break of today's show, and we come back. We are going to talk all about the Maple Leafs loading up to the most expensive line in the history of professional hockey. Coming up next on today's edition of Locked On NHL. Today's episode is sponsored by PrizePicks. If you love sports, you're going to love PrizePicks, the best place to turn your sports knowledge into real money. Whether it's hockey, football, or any of your other favorite sports, PrizePicks makes it easy to get in on the action. You can now win up to 1,000 times your money on PrizePicks. Plus, this holiday season, they're giving away over $30 million in rewards during Picksmas and offering 2 free picks in December. And when your picks hit, PrizePicks makes it easy to cash out. You can get your money in as fast as 15 minutes. This week on PrizePicks, looking at the hockey board tonight, you got the Oilers and Bruins. You could do something like Evan Bouchard, more than 3.5 shots on goal. Leon Draisaitl, more than 1 goal. It's so simple to make picks and have fun with friends while potentially cashing out fast. Download the PrizePicks app today. Use code LOCKEDONNHL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's right, $50 instantly. PrizePicks. Run your game. Today's show is also brought to you by SelectQuote, the World Series, Super Bowl, the Olympics. The world's top athletes get to play in these top-level sporting events thanks to one thing, teamwork. And teamwork can also protect your financial legacy, your family's future. SelectQuote's licensed insurance agents are the perfect teammates when shopping for customized, affordable life insurance. They can find you the right policy to keep your financial legacy safely in your family's end zone. SelectQuote is one of America's leading insurance brokers with nearly 40 years of experience, helping over 2 million customers find over $700 billion in coverage since 1985. Other life insurance brokers offer impersonal, one-size-fits-all policies that may cost you more and cover you less, while SelectQuote's licensed insurance agents work for you to tailor a life insurance policy for your individual needs in as little as 15 minutes. If you're in good health, they work with carriers that can get you same-day coverage for up to $5 million, medical exam required. Head to SelectQuote.com and a licensed insurance agent will call you right away with the right policy for your life and your budget. SelectQuote. They shop, you save. Get the right life insurance for you or less at SelectQuote.com/LockedOnNHL. Go to SelectQuote.com/LockedOnNHL today to get started. That's SelectQuote.com/LockedOnNHL. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out with Hunter and I here on this Thursday edition of Locked On NHL as we're making our way through some of the more interesting storylines of the last day or so across the league. And the Leafs are in a weird spot as a team. You know, they're in a playoff spot. There are really high expectations this year. You have the lingering Mitch Marner situation hanging over the team as far as the long-term future. John Tavares is also a free agent after the season as well. And it kind of has a bit of a last dance vibe to it where everybody kind of knows that this group isn't going to be able to stay together beyond this year. And it's very interesting to see Craig Berube, in search of more offense, load up a superstar line of Nylander, Marner, and Matthews, because that's happened extremely infrequently, even though all 3 of them have been in Toronto for an extended period of time. Here's Locked On Leafs to break it down.
First time that I can really ever remember the Maple Leafs are loading up the top line. It looks like for this game tonight, we're going to see Auston Matthews, Mitch Marner, and William Nylander all on the same line to start the game, and they might get a real run at this.
Yeah, I think when you consider this road matchup, they're forcing the issue right now of trying to get this 5-on-5 offense going on the road because it hasn't been very good. Like at home, Leafs have no problem scoring. On the road, hasn't been there to that level, right?
They're averaging 2.62 goals per game on the road this year.
Yeah, that's not to the level that we would expect with this type of talent. And I was floored to see this because I would have thought the last thing Craig Berube would ever do is put all 3 of these guys on a line. We've seen these 3 play together.
Dude, why not though? Like, why not? Like Jonas Siegel was on Overdrive today. And he brought up a good point. He's like, we've seen super lines work in the NHL. Like, look at what they did for years in Boston, right? With the perfection line of Pasternak and Bergeron and Marchand. You look at what they've done in Colorado for years. And they had Rantanen, McKinnon, and Landeskog all on the same line. Like we've seen teams load up like this before and have great success.
So, as far as the underlying theory, I don't think this is a bad idea if you're struggling offensively. You know, we see the Oilers do this from time to time. This is the last year and a half is really the first time for a full season where Draisaitl and McDavid have been separate from each other for long stretches. You know, last year was the first season in either's respective career where their most common line mate wasn't the other one. And it's a real gift when you're able to separate your best players, because it deepens your lineup. It enables you to control more of the game. But when you're hunting and you need that offense, this is not a bad failsafe. You know, some teams are more reluctant to do this than others. I know the Rangers have really, really tried to not put Zibanejad and Panarin together at various points over the last 4 years because they understand that they need to keep some depth throughout their lineup. That's the drawback, obviously. If you load up your first line, the rest of your lineup, it becomes a lot harder for them. So that's really your trade-off. If your first line, if you load everyone up on one line, doesn't give you the offense you need, you're almost certainly losing that game because you can't expect your depth guys to do it without the stars on their line.
Exactly. It makes your lineup a bit too top heavy. Though I will say the early returns last night for that super line, Nick, you know, with Marner, Matthews, and Nylander, it was pretty good. You know, almost 11 minutes at 5-on-5 ice time. When they were on the ice, they had about 53% of the shot attempts, 8 scoring chances for, 3 scoring chances against, 4 high danger chances for, 2 high danger chances against. So pretty good early returns. It kind of reminds me of what the Penguins were doing earlier this year. They actually loaded up Crosby and Malkin together on one line with Rickard Rakell, something that they have rarely ever done during their careers. They sometimes have done it late in games at 5-on-5 when they maybe need a tying goal before the 6-on-5 situation, but they really gave Crosby and Malkin a pretty good go at it earlier this year. I mean, there's been 25 games of that line together, about 110 minutes. When they were on the ice, that they controlled 61% of the expected goals, 3.65 expected goals for per 60 minutes, 2.29 expected goals against per 60 minutes. All that comes via money puck. So that worked because they were able to jumpstart Crosby a little bit. They were able to jumpstart Malkin a little bit more as well. And that's what the Leafs are looking for here with that top line. But as you said, if after this game it doesn't work as intended, it just makes the rest of your lineup, it puts more pressure on the rest of your lineup because, you know, you're asking all your depth players to contribute. By spreading them out, that's usually the way to go because you can have more offense on more than just one line. After the Penguins got Crosby going a little bit more after they loaded him up with Malkin, they were able to be like, okay, now that he's going a little bit, we're going to move Malkin back to his line, put Michael Bunting with him, Philip Tomasino, etc. I feel like once they get 1 or 2 of those 3 players going even more on that top line, I think the Leafs are going to separate them again and be like, okay, we're going to give you to the second line, maybe give you to the third line, something like that. So I think it's a potential good short-term fix to maybe get more 5-on-5 offense, but I don't think this is going to be anything long-term. And you mentioned something before we played the video of Locked On Leafs. I do think this could be their last chance because you mentioned, you know, Marner, UFA, Zararis, UFA. I personally don't think they're going to bring both back, especially if they have another early playoff exit. That just, it goes to show how big a potential deep run could be for this team this year if they can go on it.
Yeah, the last thing I want to get in on this before we take our final break of the episode, when you have all your stars on one line, that makes the burden of your other lines where your margin for error is basically non-existent in those minutes when those guys are out there. And that's really the trade-off here. You know, the more you deepen your lineup, the more diversity you have throughout your lineup in terms of skill and talent, the more opportunities you have to cover up mistakes, to prevent mistakes, or to counteract mistakes. Whereas if you build your lineup like this, your bottom 6, bottom 9 in this case, has to basically be perfect. And then you need your big dogs to eat. Because if they don't play perfectly in your bottom 6, bottom 9, I should say, in this case, that puts more on your big guys. And your big guys need to do more than's probably realistically possible in the amount of minutes. You know, unfortunately, this is hockey where, like you said, 11 5-on-5 minutes, that's a sixth of the game. And you think about that in terms of the other sports where, you know, a great pitcher can stay in the game as long as they want. A great football player is out there every snap. A great basketball player is playing 41, 42 of 48 potential minutes. So you really have to be on top of things when you're going to load everything up. We're going to take one final break on today's show, and then we're going to visit a potential trade that never came to be from a couple years back and what that would have done to the NHL at large, coming up right after this. Get ready to tackle NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you got a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. Tonight in the NFL, important game in the AFC, Broncos-Chargers, two teams in the wild card mix. The Chargers are 2.5-point favorites at home. Saturday afternoon, Hunter Steelers are taking on the Ravens. Two-time NFL MVP Lamar Jackson and the Ravens are 6.5-point favorites. And then on Sunday, if you're still in the mix, Minnesota and Seattle, the Seahawks fighting for their playoff lives Sunday afternoon, 3-point favorites, 3-point underdogs at home to the Vikings, who are very much in the mix. Be a serious Super Bowl contender. You can get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out here on this Thursday edition of Locked On NHL. And we typically don't get these types of tidbits until the summer when there's absolutely nothing going on. But Jeff Merrick, in trying to build up some publicity for his new podcast, his new content endeavor, just casually threw out there with Greg Wisniewski that there was a trade on the table between the Lightning and the Oilers in the summer of 2019 that was centered around trading Leon Draisaitl for Nikita Kucherov. Obviously, that trade did not come to fruition for a variety of reasons. Merrick says ultimately it fell apart because the Oilers were insisting on additional things on top of Kucherov in return for Draisaitl. At the time, Kucherov was 25. Draisaitl was 23. Kucherov was in the first year of the contract he's currently on, which is worth $9.5 million per year. Draisaitl was in year 3 of the extension that expires this year at $8.5 per year. Very interesting idea because Tampa Bay is coming off the year. They lose to Columbus in the first round where they get swept. The Oilers had made the playoffs for 2 straight years and wouldn't make the real playoffs for 2 more years after this. And it just presents an interesting what if, because naturally you would say, well, do you think the Lightning win 1 cup, 2 cups, no cups with Draisaitl as opposed to Kucherov? Do the Oilers just run Kucherov and McDavid on the same line and obliterate the NHL at 5-on-5, or do they separate them? What does that do for each team's respective trajectory? And it presents a really good thought exercise.
100%. I mean, you look at after those seasons, Draisaitl, he's coming off a 50-goal, 105-point season in 2019. Kucherov, for him,
he won the Hart that year.
Yeah, I know. 41 goals, 128 points in 82 games for Kucherov that year. Remember, the Lightning got swept by the Blue Jackets before they went on to win the back-to-back cup. So, obviously, looking at it now, the Lightning, I'm sure, they're glad they didn't make that trade because they went on to win back-to-back cups after that. Then they went to a 3rd straight Stanley Cup final. Didn't win that one, but it was still one heck of a run by the Lightning. But looking back at it now, just thinking of a potential, I know you mentioned that the Oilers were looking for a bit more in return there, but if we were just strictly looking at this 1-for-1, would you have done it at that time? I feel like it would have been a risk that both teams were making, but it's again interesting because you brought it up because I was going to say this as well. You put Kucherov with McDavid, that would have been insane. And then Draisaitl can be, Tampa Bay's top center, if we're being honest, and then him and Stamkos together. Cool. I mean, it would have made for something crazy. It would be a trade that we really don't see very often in the NHL. That's like an NBA trade, Nick. You see those type of blockbuster NBA trades every year. We don't really get that a lot in the NHL. That's what this would have been. I think if it were 1-for-1, I really wonder if both teams would do it. I kind of would lean yes, just because Tampa would be looking for a big shakeup after what happened in 2019. Obviously, again, glad that they didn't do it because they went on to win the back-to-back cups. But if this were a strict 1-for-1 scenario, I really do think there's a world where both teams lean yes and they go and they do it.
It's really interesting because you think about it in terms of what that would do to each team's lineup. If you're Tampa Bay, that means you probably can move Stamkos to the wing a year earlier. That means you probably are running Draisaitl point down the middle as your 1-2. It means you can afford to move on from Killorn and Palat the way you do ultimately. it brings into question what you would do with that extra $1 million because Kucherov was making $1 million more than Draisaitl. It makes you wonder, would you have been able to do what you did the second year? Because remember, that's the year Kucherov spends the entire regular season on LTIR and gets activated for the playoffs the second time they win the Stanley Cup. So that's something to consider as well. And then for Edmonton's issue, basically the entirety of the Draisaitl-McDavid tenure has been building the team around those guys. What does it do for your team building that you lose $1 million you could spend other places in your lineup? You get 2 years older for one of your most important players. But as far as like competitiveness, it would be really interesting to see. I might go into the time machine and see if anybody's thrown together NHL 19 rosters on the newest NHL and throw it into the sim and see what happens, because I'm curious. Kucherov and McDavid together is fascinating because you think about, they fulfill similar roles on their respective power plays where they're the facilitator to set up the big one-timer. You know, so many of those Kucherov assists over the last 4 or 5 years were from the right side boards at the half wall across to Stamkos for the one-timer. But if the Oilers don't have Draisaitl for the one-timer at the bottom of the right circle, does that mean Kucherov is going to become more of a goal scorer as opposed to a facilitator? If Draisaitl's in Tampa Bay, him and Stamkos both like the one-timer. So who becomes the trigger man in those key situations? Do you have both where you're trying to run the power play through Point or Hedman to set up those respective one-timers from opposite points? It really presents a really unique opportunity to just think about it strategically and tactically, because these are such gifted players. You know, we're not arguing about Blake Coleman versus Yanni Gourde. We're arguing Kucherov versus Draisaitl. You know, these are two of the 10 best players of their era. You know, I don't think you're going to get any qualms about that. I think I'm very curious to see how things all shake out when all's said and done, as far as who's perceived as better when we go into history. You know, they both have some nice awards. Kucherov obviously has the team success. Neither guy has anything internationally, but it's a really fascinating idea. And part of me wishes it would have happened, just because I think we need to have that, for lack of a better word, the dam breaking moment where NHL teams stop being scared of making mistakes as opposed to being brave enough to take swings. Because this is the type of trade, like you said, that we see in the NBA, that we see in baseball, where star for star can benefit both teams. You know, the Tkachuk trade happens 3 years after this, and that's really the first major one I can think of in the salary cap era. I wish it would have happened, just purely because it would have been fun. I don't think Tampa Bay wins two if they trade for Draisaitl, just because of how things shook out for them, especially the second year. Because like I said,
the big question is, does Edmonton win at least one before now with Kucherov and McDavid?
Probably not. And the reason I say that is because the depth has been the issue in Edmonton. And like, you think about it, like they got Evander Kane for a bag of chips when he was bought out. He was the league minimum that year. They still didn't have great depth. You know, we're talking about first pair Duncan Keith in 2021.
Yep.
That's kind of the issue for Edmonton. It's been sorting out the supporting cast. The supporting cast is pretty good now. You know, if you were to do this trade now, and Kucherov's, you know, like 31 now, and Draisaitl's 27 turning 28, it probably wouldn't be as beneficial as it would have been, say, 5 years ago. But I think it would make more sense now in terms of to ask the question, do you think Kucherov would help them winning going forward, as opposed to 5 years ago when they were still really sorting out the supporting cast? You know, the season after this, they lose to the Coyotes in the bubble.
Yep. No, I mean, the Oilers, they were definitely having a lot of trouble with the supporting cast. That's like the biggest thing they've been needing to get right. You know, you have the big guns already in place. Now you just been needing to surround them, you know, with adequate talent, run 4 lines, run 3 good defensive pairs, get at least average goaltending. You know, the Penguins, they were able to get that right, especially in 16 and 17. You had the stars in place. Rutherford just needed to kind of tinker around the edges, and he went on that 18th month heater. You know, the Oilers, they were kind of needing something like that as well. And heck, you know, last year they got all the way to Game 7 in the final before they barely lost. So I think this year they'll also be trying to tinker a little bit with their lineup heading into the deadline. They're starting to really figure things out after another slow start. Would not be surprised if their front office was still pretty aggressive over these next few months.
That will do it for today's edition of Locked On NHL. Thank you to everybody who listened to today's episode. If you could be so kind, please subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. Or if you're watching over on YouTube, hit the subscribe button, hit the alarm bell so you can get notifications whenever new content goes live. Hunter and I will talk to you guys next week.